What's currently happening in Ethiopia? It has been over 81 days since Prime Minister Abiy's war on the Amhara region began. This war began under the cover of law enforcement to apprehend so-called extremist forces. Since May 2023, the Amhara region has been under de facto martial law, with regime forces committing killings, rape, abductions, looting, and property destruction. This war has fueled Amhara resistance, which is a righteous struggle for the Amhara people for self-preservation and restoration of their basic rights, democratic freedoms, and dignity. The latest wave of resistance began in April 2023, when anti-government protests were seen across more than 30 cities in Amhara region, involving millions of people, making this one of the largest civil movements of the 21st century. The protesters' demands were very simple. It was for the removal of Prime Minister Abiy and his party from power, an end to Amhara genocide in Oromia region, an end to ethnic-based travel restrictions into and out of the nation's capital, an end to demolitions of homes, support for millions of IDPs, an end to religious interference and corruption, and the release of over 10,000 political prisoners. And on the notion of political prisoners, there's an ongoing attack against freedom of press, independent journalists, and media agencies which face arrests, persecution, property theft, and large fines. Journalists such as Gobize Sisai, Meskara Magara, Sintayo Chakol have been arrested multiple times, and these arrests are not limited to just the journalists, but also opposition figures, academics, students, office workers, and charity workers. Victims are often abducted from the streets, and sometimes their homes in front of their spouses and children. Widespread torture against prisoners has also been revealed by federal and Oromia region authorities, including in a military camp called Gelan. And lastly, religious freedom and secularism are also under attack, including attacks against the Orthodox Church and the Muslim community. And these have actually included demolitions of dozens of mosques and killing of worshippers in the capital city, as well as government security forces killing worshippers outside of churches. So how did we get here? The latest wave of ethnic and religious attacks followed the 2-year war in northern Ethiopia, which devastated millions of people. And so there was actually an occupation of the Amhara and Afar regions during which a lot of crimes took place. And we can look no further than the Mai Kadra massacre in November 2020, in which 1,600 Amhara civilians were killed. 1,600. There were other large-scale massacres in places like Alamata, Opo, China, Desi, and Galikoma. And so when we talk about Amhara genocide, this has been one of the important factors which led to protests. And this refers to a pattern of systemic atrocities and policies to depopulate the Amhara population. And so we have a problem of failed governance. 5 years of an ideology called Medemmer, which Prime Minister Abiy introduced as the mantra of the Prosperity Party. On the surface, he promises economic development, self-sufficiency, and prosperity, but really it's a Trojan horse for another, more ethnic-based policy, favoring his party, which is the Oromo Prosperity Party. For example, we can take the Oromia region president, Shimellis Abdisa, who constantly talks about self-sufficiency, food production, and invokes the term he calls the New Ethiopia. And this is the same figure who had made several public speeches actually referring to Amhara people as Neftenya, a dog whistle term used by these groups to incite violence. So there's this epidemic of hate speech and genocidal rhetoric targeting Amhara people, and this can also be very generalized towards creating fear about Amhara people, dehumanizing them, pushing oppressor narratives, and then this is actually happening despite this group being systematically excluded from positions of governance in Ethiopia for many decades. Social media has offered enhanced opportunities for exchange of information, citizen journalism, but also has the potential to do harm. And so these groups have used several euphemisms to target Amharas, including Amhara elites, Neftenya, and other terms that are similar to that. So what lessons did we learn? Despite the peace deal that was signed between the TPLF and the Prosperity Party, ethnic violence and war has continued and actually intensified in certain parts of the country. Some critics called the deal exclusionary due to the lack of independent representation from some groups, including the Amharas. And there was also a belief that the deal did not offer justice and accountability to the victims of the war. So what needs to be done? The Abiy regime must immediately stop its genocidal war on Amhara people. We need the immediate resignation of the Prime Minister and his cabinet to make way for a civilian-led transitional government which is inclusive and democratic. And we need independent investigations into the genocide, including the war crimes and the atrocities. And we can name a number of perpetrators who would actually be accountable for this, including the likes of Abiy Ahmed, Shimadlis Abdisa, Adanish Ababe, Kumsa Deriba, Jawar Mohammed, Debrzion Debre Mikael, Gita Choretta, Taddisa Warada, Adkan Debre Tensai, Yilik Al-Kafala, Adingam Tishagar, Temeskin Turuna, Burhanu Jula, and Ababao Taddisa. This is not an exhaustive list, but rather an important beginning to something that's going to be more robust, hopefully. So in conclusion, Ethiopia is at a crossroads once again, and millions of people are in a bitter struggle for survival. Ultimately, we believe change will come from the inside by the resolve of the people, but from the periphery, we can be a voice for the voiceless and help to mitigate human suffrage, which should be at the core of policy driven by human rights. Thank you.